A shooting that killed 2 people and sent 2 others to the hospital has been traced back to a territory beef between 2 rival gangs.
When leather meets asphalt and brotherhood turns to bloodshed, history's darkest motorcycle moments are written. These aren't your weekend riders. They're the 1%ers, the outlaws who've shaped motorcycle club culture through violence, territory wars, and internal purges. They've anchored the concept of outlaw bikers in our cultural consciousness. Grab a beer and buckle up. We're taking a ride through the most infamous motorcycle massacres in history. Number 10. Hollister Riot, 1947. July 4th weekend, 1947, a date that forever changed America's thinking of motorcyclists and birthed the outlaw biker image that still exists today. The sleepy California town of Hollister was about to experience an invasion that would make headlines across the country and spawn decades of biker mythology. What went down in Hollister wasn't planned, it just happened. About 4,000 bikers rolled into this little farming town for the AMA-sanctioned Gypsy Tour motorcycle rally. The town had hosted these events before without major issues, but this was the first big rally after World War II ended. Thousands of young men, fresh from combat, with money in their pockets and a hunger for adrenaline, converged on a town with a police force of just 7 officers. You do the math. The trouble kicked off when booze started flowing. Bikers raced their choppers down Main Street, popping wheelies and burning rubber. Some guys decided drinking inside was boring, so they just rode their motorcycles straight into bars. Glass bottles shattered against buildings. Fights broke out. Drunken bikers passed out on sidewalks, in parks, anywhere they fell. The few cops couldn't do much beyond arrest the worst offenders, and the tiny local jail filled up fast. Now here's where things get interesting. Was it actually a riot? Probably not, at least not by today's standards. Local residents later said the media massively overblew what happened. Yeah, there was public drunkenness, some property damage and rowdiness, but nothing that unusual for a massive gathering fueled by alcohol. Most bikers were just having a good time. But then Life magazine got involved. A photographer named Barney Peterson snapped a now iconic photo of a drunk biker sitting on his motorcycle surrounded by broken beer bottles. The kicker? Many claim the photo was staged, with bottles deliberately arranged around the biker for dramatic effect. When Life published it with sensationalist coverage, America collectively lost its shit. Suddenly, motorcyclists were dangerous outlaws threatening decent society. The fallout was immediate. This single weekend transformed the public image of motorcyclists from returning war heroes to dangerous hooligans. The American Motorcyclist Association allegedly responded by stating that 99% of motorcyclists were law-abiding citizens, and only 1% caused trouble. Whether they actually said this is disputed, but the 1%er label stuck and was ironically embraced by clubs like the Hells Angels, who wore 1% patches with pride. Hollywood couldn't resist the narrative. In 1953, The Wild One, starring Marlon Brando, hit theaters, loosely based on the Hollister events. When asked what he's rebelling against, Brando's character Johnny famously responds, "What do you got?" The film cemented the outlaw biker image in American culture forever.
Tell me what that means, BRMC. What does it mean?
Black Rebels Motorcycle Club.
Isn't that cute? Hey, Johnny, what are you rebelling against?
What do you got?
The real legacy of Hollister wasn't the actual events, which were relatively tame, but how they were portrayed. This single weekend created the template for outlaw motorcycle culture and moral panic about bikers that persists to this day. The mythology became more powerful than reality. Decades later, Hollister eventually embraced its biker history, establishing an annual rally that draws thousands. The town realized that instead of running from its notorious past, it could profit from it. The modern event is family-friendly, heavily policed, and pumps millions into the local economy.
Hollister City Council unanimously voted Tuesday night in favor of bringing back the biker rally for 2025, an event greatly missed by the community.
What makes Hollister fascinating isn't just what happened, but how a relatively minor incident, amplified by media hysteria, created an entire cultural archetype. Without Hollister, there might never have been the romanticized outlaw biker image that influenced everything from fashion to music to later, actual organized biker gangs who modeled themselves after the reputation created by a magazine photo. While Hollister created the outlaw biker image, our next massacre showed just how dark that world could really get when the blood started flowing for real. Number 9. Charlotte Independence Day Massacre, 1979. July 4, 1979. While most Americans were busy with barbecues and fireworks, Charlotte, North Carolina became the setting for what locals would call the city's worst mass killing. The Outlaws Motorcycle Club, already making a name for themselves across the country, were about to add another bloody chapter to their reputation with a massacre that sent shockwaves through both the criminal underworld and law enforcement. The Outlaws Clubhouse sat in a working-class neighborhood, an unassuming converted house where members gathered to drink, party, and conduct business. That Independence Day, while the rest of the city celebrated freedom, 5 people inside that clubhouse would lose theirs permanently. The victims weren't random. This was an internal cleansing, a brutal reminder of what happens when you cross the wrong people in the outlaw biker world. The massacre unfolded with cold efficiency. Around midnight, as July 4th was coming to a close, specific members were targeted in what investigators would later determine was a planned execution. Witnesses in the neighborhood reported hearing what they thought were leftover fireworks. Instead, they were gunshots systematically ending lives inside the clubhouse walls.
My name's Ron Jarrett. I was a police officer back in the days when the outlaw motorcycle gangs had a killing at their clubhouse on Allen Street. I was called by my supervisor, sergeant, who advised me 5 people had died, had been killed. I thought he was kidding me, so I hung up on him. Then he called me back again. He told me he was serious.
What made this incident particularly chilling wasn't just the body count, it was the methodology. Each victim was shot multiple times at close range. This wasn't a heated brawl that got out of hand. This was calculated, premeditated, the kind of killing that sends a message. Police found empty beer cans scattered around corpses, suggesting the victims had been relaxing, maybe even celebrating the holiday when death came knocking. The motives behind the Charlotte massacre reveal the complex internal politics of outlaw motorcycle clubs. According to investigators who spent years piecing together the story, the bloodshed stemmed from suspicions of members cooperating with law enforcement, the cardinal sin in outlaw culture. There were also rumors of missing drug money, territory disputes, and personal vendettas. The truth, as is often the case with closed criminal organizations, remained murky, with multiple overlapping reasons for the bloodshed. The aftermath revealed how deeply entrenched the outlaws' code of silence was. Despite 5 people being gunned down in cold blood, witnesses vanished. People who knew things suddenly developed amnesia when police questioned them. The blue wall of silence has nothing on the leather wall of silence that surrounds these clubs. For months, investigators hit dead end after dead end.
Talking with people and stuff like that. Found a mess of people killed. It's pretty sad. All of them appeared to have been sleeping. There were a bunch of guns on the pool table. And then, of course, the 5 bodies right inside the house itself, 4 inside and 1 outside.
What makes this massacre particularly significant in outlaw motorcycle club history is how it represented a turning point in law enforcement approaches to these organizations. Before Charlotte, many police departments viewed biker clubs as nuisances, rowdy, violent sometimes, but primarily threats to themselves. After Charlotte, federal agencies began viewing them as organized crime enterprises worthy of RICO investigations and dedicated task forces. The Charlotte massacre also highlighted the evolution of outlaw motorcycle clubs, from the rebellious but relatively disorganized groups from the Hollister era to sophisticated criminal organizations with hierarchies, territories, and business interests worth killing to protect. By 1979, clubs like the Outlaws weren't just weekend warriors raising hell. They were coordinated criminal enterprises with fingers in everything from drugs to prostitution to weapons trafficking. Perhaps most disturbing about the Charlotte massacre was how quickly it faded from public consciousness. While 5 people murdered anywhere would typically generate sustained coverage and outrage, the deaths of bikers at the hands of other bikers was treated almost as natural selection. Dangerous people living dangerous lives, meeting predictably violent ends. The media coverage, while initially intense, quickly dissipated, reflecting society's ambivalence about violence within criminal subcultures. The law enforcement response was another story entirely. Behind the scenes, the Charlotte Massacre became a case study for how to infiltrate and prosecute outlaw motorcycle clubs. Undercover operations increased, electronic surveillance expanded. Within a few years, multiple outlaws chapters across the country faced unprecedented legal pressure directly linked to investigative techniques developed following Charlotte. Internal club executions were one thing, but when club warfare erupted in broad daylight at a public venue, the biker world would reach new levels of notoriety. Number 8. Father's Day Massacre, 1984.
The fight began in the hotel car park, where members of the British Motorcycle Club had organised a party to celebrate Australia's Father's Day, and had turned the normally quiet suburb into a battleground. It's still not clear how the fight began, but police say two rival motorcycle gangs arrived at the hotel and began fighting, with rifles, shotguns, baseball bats and knives. One of those killed was a 14-year-old girl selling raffle tickets. The shooting was still going on as the first of a dozen ambulances arrived. It stopped briefly to allow paramedics and ambulance men.
Sunday, September the 2nd, 1984, Father's Day in Australia. While most dads were opening presents and enjoying family barbecues, the parking lot of the Viking Tavern in Milperra, a Sydney suburb, was about to become a battlefield. The Father's Day Massacre, also called the Milperra Massacre, would go down as the bloodiest biker conflict in Australian history, leaving 7 dead, including 1 innocent bystander, and forever changing how Australians viewed outlaw motorcycle clubs. This wasn't some spontaneous bar fight that got out of hand. This was a planned showdown between the Bandidos and Comancheros, 2 heavyweight clubs with serious beef. The roots of this conflict ran deep. Most of the Bandidos involved had originally been Comancheros, who'd broken away after clashing with the club's founder and self-styled Supreme Commander, William Jock Ross, a Scottish immigrant who ran the Comancheros like a military unit with himself as the unquestioned dictator. When tensions boiled over in 1983, a second Comanchero chapter formed in Sydney City under Anthony Snoddy Spencer. Jock Ross wasn't having it. In his mind, there could only be one Comanchero chapter with him at the top. But Snoddy and his boys weren't backing down. The split escalated when the breakaway chapter patched over to become Australia's first Bandidos chapter, bringing international backing to what had been a local power struggle.
Splitting the club, it turns out, would end up leading to the Milperra Massacre.
Yeah, but you couldn't see that at the time, could you?
For months, tensions simmered, clubhouses were fortified, weapons stockpiled. Members stopped riding alone. It was a powder keg waiting for a spark. That spark came on August 10th, 1984, during a phone call between Jock Ross and Snoddy Spencer. Threats were made, challenges issued, war was declared. The only question was where and when the inevitable bloodshed would happen. The Viking Tavern motorcycle swap meet on Father's Day provided the answer. Word spread that both clubs would be there. The Comancheros arrived first, about 30 strong, armed with bats, chains, machetes, and hidden firearms. When approximately 20 Bandidos rolled up minutes later, women and children were still present, innocently browsing motorcycle parts.
What I saw were deliberate actions. They went there armed, they knew what was going to happen, they were waiting for it to happen. They could hardly be surprised when it did happen.
And innocent people like yourself got caught up in their war.
Many, many innocent people.
What happened next looked like something out of a war zone, not suburban Sydney. Someone shouted, "Here they come," and all hell broke loose. The first shots fired changed everything. What might have been a typical brawl turned into a full-blown firefight. Club members who'd expected to use their fists, or maybe chains, suddenly pulled out concealed weapons. In just 8 brutal minutes, 7 people lay dead or dying. The casualties told the story: 4 Comancheros, 2 Bandidos, and the true tragedy. Leanne Walters, a 14-year-old girl who took a stray bullet to the face while hiding behind a car. She'd just come to the swap meet with her father, completely uninvolved with either club. Her death particularly horrified the Australian public and turned any remaining romantic notions about bikers into revulsion.
The year is 1984 and Australia's most violent bikie war is brewing. Leanne Walters is 15 years old and about to become the innocent face of the Milperra Massacre. She's bought her dad a Father's Day present and is on her way to see him after she looks around the bike swap meeting in the car park of the Viking Tavern. But Leanne never gets to see her dad on Father's Day. She's gunned down in the battle between the notorious Comancheros, led by Jock Ross, and the newly formed Bandidos, led by Snotty Spencer. It remains the world's worst single outbreak of bikie violence.
When police arrived, they found a scene of chaos. Blood-soaked bikers sprawled across the parking lot, discarded weapons, screaming witnesses, and shell casings everywhere. 28 bikers were arrested on the spot. The immediate aftermath looked like a battlefield triage center, with paramedics working frantically to save the wounded while officers tried to secure what had instantly become Australia's largest crime scene. The legal consequences were unprecedented. Eventually, 31 men were charged with murder, leading to what was then the largest murder trial in Australian history. It stretched on for almost 2 years. The courtroom had to be specially reinforced with bulletproof glass. The cost to taxpayers ran into the millions. In the end, most were convicted of manslaughter rather than murder. Sentences ranged from 6 to 14 years, with both club presidents, Ross and Spencer, receiving the heaviest penalties. When the dust settled, over 1,000 years of combined prison sentences had been handed down. The Father's Day massacre transformed Australia's legal and cultural landscape. New anti-gun laws were fast-tracked. Police formed specialized task forces focused exclusively on outlaw motorcycle clubs. The public's perception of bikers shifted overnight from rebellious free spirits to dangerous criminal gangs. Political pressure mounted for crackdowns that continue to this day, with Australia now having some of the world's strictest anti-bikies laws. What's particularly haunting about the Milperra massacre is how mundane the setting was. This wasn't some remote location. It was a suburban pub parking lot on a Sunday morning, with families present. The everyday setting made the extreme violence even more shocking. One moment people were checking out motorcycle parts, the next they were diving for cover from flying bullets. While Australian bikers were making headlines with public shootouts, up north in Canada, the Hells Angels were about to show that sometimes your deadliest enemies are wearing the same patch as you. Number 7. Lennoxville Massacre, 1985. March 24, 1985. A late winter chill hung in the air as 5 Hells Angels from the Laval chapter rolled up to the Sherbrooke chapter clubhouse in Lennoxville, Quebec. They thought they were heading to a party. Instead, they were riding straight into an ambush that would become one of the most notorious internal purges in outlaw biker history. The Lennoxville Massacre wasn't about territory or rivalries with enemy clubs. This was family business, Hells Angels killing their own. The Sherbrooke, Montreal, and Halifax chapters had reached a breaking point with their Laval brothers. The North chapter boys had developed a reputation that was bad even by Hells Angels standards. These weren't just tough guys. They were wild cards, unpredictable junkies who couldn't keep their shit together. The 5 Laval members, Laurent Langlais, Viau, Jean-Guy Brutus, Geoffrion, Jean-Pierre Matt Le Crosseur, Mathieu, Michel Willie Mayrand, and Guy-Louis Chop Adam had no clue what was waiting for them when they parked their bikes. The moment they walked through the door, they were jumped, stripped of their colors, and beaten. One by one, they were led to the basement and executed with shots to the head. No mercy, no hesitation, just cold elimination of a problem. This wasn't a heat-of-the-moment thing. The cleanup had been meticulously planned. The killers wrapped the bodies in sleeping bags, weighed them down with dumbbells and concrete blocks, and dumped them in the St. Lawrence River. For weeks, the official story was that the missing bikers had simply gone on a drug run. But rivers don't keep secrets forever. When spring thaw came, a fisherman spotted one of the sleeping bags that had floated to the surface, kicking off an investigation that would eventually bring down multiple Hells Angels chapters.
But by 1982, that attitude had somehow changed. In 1985, they were involved in such high-level drug dealers with such groups as the West End Gang and the Mafia, groups that require professionalism from their business associates, that they basically decide we have to decide our future here. If we're going to grow and become the businessman we want to be, we have to get rid of this whole unruly aspect as part of our group. That was basically the motive behind the Lennoxville Purge. It was a time for them to get rid of their unruly members. Those unruly members had basically created very complicated debt with a group called the West End Gang, and this whole thing that transpired on March 24th, 1985 was a settling of all those accounts.
Why go to such extremes against your own brothers? The reasons: mixed business with personal beef. The Laval boys had been hitting the product too hard, stealing from the club's own drug supply and developing serious addiction problems. They'd become unpredictable, a major liability in an organization that, despite its wild reputation, actually prizes control and discipline. There were also rumors they'd kept money that should have gone to the club and had pissed off Frank "Junie" Ryan, a powerful local gangster with connections to Montreal's West End gang. When Ryan was later murdered, some Laval members reportedly planned revenge bombings without getting proper clearance from higher-ups. In the strictly hierarchical world of the Hells Angels, that's a fatal mistake. The club's leadership decided the entire chapter needed to be taught a lesson, and 5 members would serve as examples. The aftermath of Lennoxville sent shockwaves through the entire Hells Angels organization. The message was crystal clear. No one is untouchable, not even patch holders. The colors on your back won't save you if you become a liability to the club. Some surviving Laval members were allowed to transfer to other chapters, but only after proving their loyalty all over again. Police eventually arrested 19 Hells Angels for the murders. The trials dragged on for years, with most eventually pleading guilty to reduced charges of manslaughter. Many got sentences as short as 5 years, a bargain considering 5 men had been executed gangland style. What's especially chilling about the Lennoxville massacre is how it revealed the corporate, almost clinical side of outlaw biker violence. This wasn't a bar brawl gone wrong or a spontaneous shootout. This was a board meeting that ended with 5 terminations, permanent ones. The Hells Angels were showing that beneath the freedom-loving rebel image was an organization willing to eliminate its own members with the cold calculation of any major crime syndicate. The massacre also marked a turning point in how Canadian law enforcement approached the Hells Angels. Before Lennoxville, many cops still viewed bikers as disorganized thugs. After recovering 5 executed bodies from a river, that perception changed permanently. Police realized they were dealing with a sophisticated criminal organization willing to enforce internal discipline through the most extreme means possible. For the average Canadian, the Lennoxville massacre ripped away any remaining romantic notions about biker culture. These weren't just tough guys who liked leather and choppers. They were calculated killers who executed their own friends. The public was horrified, and political pressure to crack down on motorcycle clubs intensified. The Hells Angels, in their own twisted way, emerged stronger from the bloodshed. The club demonstrated its willingness to enforce discipline at any cost. Surviving members got the message loud and clear: follow the rules or end up in the river. The incident solidified the club's fearsome reputation and showed potential rivals that the Angels wouldn't hesitate to use extreme violence even against their own. Imagine what they'd do to enemies. Just as the echoes of Lennoxville were fading, Europe was about to experience its own unprecedented explosion of biker violence that would make previous conflicts look like playground scuffles. Number 6. Great Nordic Biker War, 1994 to 1997.
11 to 14 deaths, 97 wounded. I mean, it was a very serious war. They had a shootout in an international airport. They were shooting rockets into each other's clubhouses. And what you have to understand, like people say, well, there's no guns in Europe. You're correct. There are no guns in Europe. You just can't go in and buy guns like you can here in the United States. But they have something different than we have. They have local militias. On the outside of town, the local militias have armories where they keep the rocket launchers, the machine guns.
When people think of Scandinavia, they usually picture peaceful social democracies with stellar healthcare and IKEA furniture, not battlefields where bikers were hunting each other with anti-tank weapons. But from 1994 to 1997, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, and Finland became the setting for the bloodiest motorcycle club war Europe had ever seen. With the Hells Angels and Bandidos, turning picturesque Nordic streets into war zones. This wasn't just a couple of bar fights and the occasional shooting. The Great Nordic Biker War featured military-grade hardware, car bombs, grenade attacks, and assassinations that left 11 dead and nearly 100 wounded. It played out like a full-scale military campaign, complete with territory maps, strategic planning, and escalating weapon technology. The escalation got so extreme that at one point members were stealing anti-tank rockets from Swedish military armories to use on rival clubhouses. To understand how shit got this crazy, we need to rewind to the late 80s. The Hells Angels had established a foothold in Scandinavia by patching over a local club called Bullshit MC in Denmark. Followed by expansions into other Nordic countries, they essentially had a monopoly on the outlaw biker scene in the region, which meant control of lucrative drug trafficking, protection rackets, and the strip club business. That monopoly got challenged when the Bandidos, eager to expand their international reach beyond America and Australia, moved into the region in 1993, absorbing a club called Undertaker's MC in Denmark. Almost overnight, the Angels' exclusive control of Scandinavia was threatened, and both clubs began aggressively recruiting and opening new chapters across the region. The war officially kicked off on April 26, 1994, when 4 Undertakers, soon to become Bandidos members, walked into a nightclub in Copenhagen and gunned down the president of the Hells Angels MC Copenhagen. From that moment, any hope of peaceful coexistence died in a hail of bullets. Both sides began systematically targeting each other, and the violence quickly spiraled beyond anything Europe had seen from biker gangs. What made this conflict uniquely terrifying was the military precision and escalating firepower. These weren't just angry bikers taking potshots at each other after too many beers. These were calculated attacks with increasingly sophisticated weapons. When one side used handguns, the other responded with shotguns. Shotguns were countered with assault rifles, and when those weren't enough, they moved on to remote-controlled bombs, anti-tank missiles, and car bombs. The most infamous attack came on October 6, 1996, when someone fired an anti-tank rocket at the Hells Angels clubhouse in Copenhagen. The rocket, stolen from a Swedish military armory, blew through the clubhouse wall but fortunately didn't kill anyone. 2 weeks later, another stolen anti-tank rocket was fired at the Bandidos' headquarters near Copenhagen. The escalation had reached literal military proportions. Cities across Scandinavia were gripped by fear as the violence spilled into public spaces. In Helsinki, a Bandidos member was shot in the head at the airport. In Norway, a car bomb meant for Bandidos members exploded in a prison parking lot. In Denmark, a Hells Angels member was executed with a shotgun while sitting in his car at a traffic light. The general public, unused to this level of violence in their peaceful societies, demanded action. The Nordic governments responded by passing some of the strictest anti-gang laws in Europe. Denmark banned motorcycle clubs from owning or renting property. Norway gave police expanded powers to monitor and infiltrate clubs. Sweden cracked down on the illegal weapons trade. Finland strengthened its organized crime statutes. Police across the region coordinated their efforts, sharing intelligence and conducting simultaneous raids on clubhouses. The pressure eventually became too much, even for these hardened organizations. On September 25, 1997, representatives from both clubs met in Copenhagen and signed a peace agreement. But by then, the damage was done. 11 people dead, 96 wounded, and Scandinavian society forever changed. The pristine image of peaceful Nordic countries had been shattered by bikers wielding military hardware on suburban streets. The war transformed how European law enforcement approached outlaw motorcycle clubs. Before, they had been seen primarily as rowdy troublemakers. After watching them deploy anti-tank weapons and car bombs, police across Europe began treating them as serious organized crime threats. Europol created specialized divisions focused solely on monitoring and disrupting biker gangs. The attitudes hardened further when it became clear these weren't just Nordic clubs fighting local battles. They were international organizations with chapters around the world that could move members, weapons, and resources across borders. While Scandinavia was counting its dead, across the Atlantic another biker war was just heating up, one that would last longer and claim far more lives than any motorcycle club conflict in history. Number 5. Quebec Biker War, 1994 to 2002. If the Nordic Biker War was a hurricane of violence, the Quebec Biker War was a grinding, methodical campaign of extermination that dragged on for nearly a decade. From 1994 to 2002, the streets of Montreal and Quebec City turned into killing fields as the Hells Angels and Rock Machine, later backed by the Bandidos, fought a war that would ultimately claim over 160 lives and create a legacy of violence that haunts Canadian organized crime to this day. This wasn't your typical biker beef over respect or territory. This was a calculated business dispute over one of the most lucrative drug markets in North America. Quebec in the mid-90s was experiencing a boom in the illegal drug trade, particularly cocaine. The province's strategic location, with access to major ports and the US border, made it a smuggler's dream. Millions, potentially billions, in drug money were up for grabs, and the Hells Angels wanted all of it. The Angels had been in Quebec since 1977, when they patched over a local club called the Popeyes. By the early 90s, they had consolidated their hold on most of Montreal's drug trade, but one organization stood in their way: the Rock Machine, a smaller local club formed in 1986 that controlled a significant piece of the downtown drug scene. The Rock Machine might have been smaller, but they weren't pushovers. They formed alliances with street gangs and established a reputation for ruthlessness that made them dangerous opponents. The war officially kicked off on July 13, 1994, when a Rock Machine-affiliated drug dealer was shot dead in Montreal. The Angels' Montreal chapter president, Maurice Mom Boucher, had allegedly decided the time had come to eliminate all competition and establish complete control over Quebec's drug trade. What followed was a systematic campaign of violence that would transform how Canada viewed and policed outlaw motorcycle clubs. What set this conflict apart wasn't just its duration or body count, but its cold efficiency. This wasn't about biker honor or spontaneous bar fights. This was business, a corporate takeover written in blood. Both sides created hit squads, whose sole purpose was to eliminate rival members. The Hells Angels' elite murder crew, the Nomads, became particularly notorious. Led by Boucher himself, the Nomads were a special chapter created specifically to wage war against the Rock Machine, with no territorial responsibilities, just killing. The level of violence was unprecedented in Canadian history. Car bombs became commonplace. Assassinations occurred in broad daylight. Both sides used sophisticated surveillance, counter-surveillance, and intelligence gathering. They had informants in police departments, correctional facilities, and government offices. The conflict turned Montreal into a city where wearing the wrong colors in the wrong neighborhood could get you killed. Perhaps most disturbing was how the violence routinely claimed innocent lives. In August 1995, an 11-year-old boy, Daniel Desrochers, was killed by shrapnel from a car bomb intended for a Rock Machine member. His death horrified Quebec society and became a turning point in public opinion. Suddenly, this wasn't just bikers killing bikers, it was a threat to everyone's safety. 4 years later, prison guard Diane Levine and correctional officer Pierre Rondeau were murdered on Boucher's orders, further proving that no one was off limits in this war. The Quebec government responded with overwhelming force. They established Operation Wolverine, later renamed Operation Carcajou, a joint forces operation that combined resources from municipal police, provincial police, and the RCMP. When that wasn't enough, they created the Wolverine Squad, a specialized unit with unprecedented powers to investigate and prosecute outlaw bikers. The crown jewel of their efforts was Bill C-95, known as the anti-gang legislation, which created new criminal offenses specifically targeting organized crime. The Rock Machine, despite being smaller, proved surprisingly resilient. In 1997, they allied themselves with the Bandidos, giving them international backing. But the Hells Angels had the advantage of numbers, resources, and a more established organization. They systematically targeted Rock Machine leadership, businesses, and drug operations. By 2000, the balance had tipped decisively in the Angels' favor. The war finally ended in 2002, not through a peace agreement, but through near-complete victory for the Hells Angels. The Rock Machine had been decimated, with many members dead, imprisoned, or in witness protection. The Bandidos' attempt to establish themselves in Quebec had largely failed. The Angels emerged as the dominant force in Quebec's criminal underworld, but at a tremendous cost.
From the grave, Danny Kaine finally exacts revenge on the Hells Angels. May 5th, 2002. The jury finds Mom Boucher guilty of the prison guard murders. Life sentence, minimum 25 years. 25 years before being eligible for parole.
I got a phone call by one of the leading investigators, and they said, we got him. And the knees just about buckled, and I got a little teary-eyed, and I'm not shy to say that, big guy like that. I felt good. It was tears of joy.
The legacy of the Quebec Biker War extends far beyond the immediate conflict. It transformed Canadian law enforcement's approach to outlaw motorcycle clubs. New legal tools, investigative techniques, and interagency cooperation models developed during the conflict are still used today. It also changed public perception of bikers from romanticized rebels to dangerous organized criminals. As the Quebec War finally cooled down, back in the southern United States, the Hells Angels were about to demonstrate their willingness to execute multiple members at once, proving that the Lennoxville Massacre wasn't just a one-time event. Number 4. Hells Angels Mesa Massacre, 2001. October 27, 2001. Mesa, Arizona. While most Americans were still reeling from the 9/11 attacks, members of the Hells Angels were gathered for what should have been a typical weekend of partying. But by sunrise the next day, 5 men would be dead in what law enforcement would later call one of the most calculated acts of internal club violence since Lennoxville. The Casa Buttercup was a nondescript stucco house in a working-class Mesa neighborhood that served as an unofficial clubhouse for local Hells Angels members. Nothing about its appearance suggested that it would become the scene of a bloodbath that would shock even hardened law enforcement veterans. That Saturday night, around a dozen Angels gathered for what witnesses later described as a disciplinary meeting. Biker code for something going seriously wrong within the club's ranks. The targets were 5 members who had allegedly violated club rules in ways that couldn't be forgiven, skimming from drug profits, talking to law enforcement, and showing disrespect to senior members. What made this massacre particularly chilling was its methodical execution. This wasn't a heat-of-the-moment brawl that spiraled out of control. According to court documents, the 5 members were called to the house one by one throughout the evening, each unaware that the others had been summoned. As each man arrived, he was taken to a back bedroom where several senior members were waiting. There, they were confronted with their alleged violations before being executed with shots to the head. The bodies were then wrapped in tarps and plastic sheeting that had been prepared in advance, clear evidence of premeditation. The killers had even brought cleaning supplies to remove blood evidence afterward. The plan unraveled when a neighbor called police after hearing what she thought were firecrackers. When officers responded to the noise complaint, they found the house suspiciously quiet. After obtaining a warrant based on a blood trail visible from outside, they discovered the grisly scene: 5 bodies carefully wrapped and staged for disposal, and club members in the process of cleaning up evidence. The Mesa Massacre exposed the ruthless internal discipline of outlaw motorcycle clubs to a nation that had previously viewed bikers primarily as rowdy rebels rather than organized criminal enterprises. It demonstrated that the Lennoxville killings in Canada weren't an aberration, but part of a pattern of brutal self-policing within these organizations. The calculated nature of the killings, executed over several hours with clear advance planning, shocked even veteran investigators familiar with biker violence. The aftermath saw the arrests of 7 Hells Angels members on first-degree murder charges. Unlike many biker prosecutions that end in plea bargains or acquittals due to witness intimidation, this case resulted in 5 convictions and lengthy prison sentences. The physical evidence was simply too overwhelming to overcome, and the club's notorious code of silence cracked when 2 junior members agreed to testify in exchange for reduced sentences. For law enforcement, the Mesa Massacre provided unprecedented insight into the Hells Angels' internal disciplinary procedures. Court testimony revealed a formal process for handling violations that included investigations, hearings by senior members, and graduated punishments ranging from fines to death. This level of organization reinforced federal authorities' classification of the Hells Angels as a sophisticated criminal enterprise rather than simply a group of motorcycle enthusiasts. The national media largely overlooked the Mesa killings as the country remained focused on terrorism in the wake of 9/11. This relative lack of coverage allowed the Hells Angels to avoid the kind of nationwide scrutiny that had followed other high-profile biker violence. Nevertheless, within law enforcement circles, the Mesa Massacre became a case study in the internal dynamics of outlaw motorcycle clubs and led to increased surveillance of club activities across the country. For the Hells Angels organization, the massacre had mixed consequences. While it reinforced their fearsome reputation and likely strengthened internal discipline, the resulting prosecutions dealt a serious blow to their Arizona operations. The chapter never fully recovered, and rival clubs moved in to fill the power vacuum in the regional drug trade. While the Hells Angels were handling their internal affairs with lethal efficiency in Arizona, across the desert in Nevada, they were about to clash with their most hated rivals in a casino showdown that would play out in front of hundreds of witnesses. Number 3. River Run Riot, 2002.
The notorious Hells Angels biker gang descends on a desert casino. Inside, over 100 members of their sworn enemies, the Mongols.
The Mongols wanted to challenge the Hells Angels for their position in the biker world, outlaw motorcycle gang world. And so to have a group of 30 or 40 Hells Angels, immediately we knew something was terribly wrong.
April 27, 2002. Laughlin, Nevada. A desert town 90 miles south of Las Vegas, known for its casinos, Colorado River recreation, and one of the biggest motorcycle rallies in the country. By 2:15 a.m., the casino floor of Harrah's Laughlin would look like a war zone. Blood pooling on the carpets, overturned slot machines, and 3 bikers dead in what would become known as the River Run Riot. The Laughlin River Run had been going strong since 1983, growing from a humble gathering of 426 bikers to a massive event drawing over 70,000 riders. The 2002 rally was in full swing, with bikers from across the country filling the hotels, bars, and casinos. Among them were 2 groups with a long history of mutual hatred, the Hells Angels and the Mongols. The beef between these clubs ran deep and nasty. The Mongols had formed in the late 60s in East LA, primarily recruiting Hispanic members who weren't welcome in the white-dominated Hells Angels. By the early 2000s, the Mongols had become one of the most aggressive challengers to Hells Angels supremacy, particularly in Southern California. Both clubs had been expanding their chapters across the Southwest, putting them on an inevitable collision course. Harrah's Laughlin had become the unofficial Hells Angels headquarters during the River Run. About 60 Angels had rooms there, many staying on the same floor. Unknown to them, approximately 30 Mongols had also checked into the hotel. Whether this was deliberate provocation or a booking mistake remains disputed, but the stage was set for disaster. 2 enemy clubs, hundreds of miles from their usual territories, suddenly sharing the same casino. The fuse was lit when a group of Mongols walked into the casino and spotted Hells Angels at the bar. According to witness accounts, words were exchanged. Then a Mongol member shoved a Hells Angel. Within seconds, the situation exploded. Knives came out, chairs were smashed, fists flew. The casino floor erupted into all-out warfare. Casino security footage later showed just how chaotic the scene became. Bikers fought with knives, wrenches, and whatever they could grab. Innocent bystanders fled in terror. Slot machines were knocked over as the battle spread across the gambling floor. In one corner, Hells Angel Jeremy Bell was stabbed multiple times. In another, Mongols member Anthony Barrera was shot. Outside the casino entrance, Hells Angel Robert Tumulty was fatally stabbed. 3 men dead, at least a dozen seriously injured, in under 3 minutes.
The Angels quickly filed into the casino, some of them with weapons ready. Before long, the Mongols and Angels confront each other. Heated words mixed with angry stares. And in a flash, all hell breaks loose.
The casino's surveillance system captured much of the violence, providing prosecutors with unprecedented evidence. Police responded in force, but by then the riot had largely burned itself out. Officers arrested dozens of bikers and secured the casino, but the damage was done. The 3 fatalities, 2 Hells Angels and 1 Mongol, ensured this would go down as one of the deadliest biker conflicts on American soil. What made the River Run riot unique wasn't just its body count, but its setting and aftermath. This wasn't a clash in some remote location or club territory. It happened in a major casino filled with hundreds of civilian witnesses and state-of-the-art security cameras. The violence erupted under the bright lights of the gambling floor, with elderly slot players and cocktail waitresses diving for cover as bikers tried to kill each other. The public nature of the conflict meant there was no controlling the narrative. America saw the raw, ugly reality of biker violence plastered across their TV screens.
When the dust finally settles, what's left is confusion and bodies. 2 angels and 1 Mongol lay slain. Many more are badly injured.
Later, there were reports that the gang members who were able to flee carried other members out that had been shot and were injured. I believe that there's actually a higher injury and death.
The legal consequences were severe. Frederick Donahue, a Hells Angels prospect who had been caught on camera stabbing 2 Mongols, 1 fatally, received a 20-year sentence. 6 other Hells Angels and 1 Mongol eventually pleaded guilty to various charges. But remarkably, most participants escaped serious legal consequences due to conflicting evidence and witness intimidation. Despite dozens being involved in the riot, only a handful ever served significant prison time. For Laughlin and the River Run, the riot marked a permanent change. The rally continued in subsequent years, but under dramatically increased security. Police checkpoints, casino dress codes prohibiting club colors, heavily armed tactical units patrolling the streets. The relaxed atmosphere that had defined the event was replaced by tense vigilance. Attendance dropped as many casual riders decided the heightened police presence wasn't worth the hassle. The River Run riot also changed how casinos throughout Nevada approached motorcycle clubs. Many established explicit policies against wearing club colors or patches on their properties. Security personnel received specialized training in identifying club members and potential conflicts. The gambling industry, having seen how quickly violence could erupt and the damage it could do to their reputation and bottom line, took a hard line against allowing their properties to become battlegrounds. For the clubs themselves, the incident had mixed consequences. The Hells Angels lost 2 members but maintained their dominant position in the biker world. The Mongols, though they lost 1 man, gained credibility for standing their ground against the more numerous Angels. The conflict added another bloody chapter to their mutual hatred, ensuring that tensions between the clubs would remain high for years to come. Law enforcement used the very public nature of the riot to push for expanded powers to monitor and infiltrate motorcycle clubs. The FBI and ATF leveraged public outrage to secure additional resources for their operations, targeting outlaw clubs. Within a year of the River Run riot, both the Mongols and Hells Angels would face major federal investigations, directly linked to the increased scrutiny following Laughlin. The River Run riot showcased the explosive violence of rival clubs in public spaces, but the next massacre would reveal something even more disturbing: the calculated elimination of an entire chapter by their own supposed brothers. Number 2. Shedden Massacre, 2006.
It was here at the Middlesex County Courthouse 6 years ago where 6 men were put on trial in the murders of 8 Bandito bikers. 9 years ago they were killed this month. Today the Ontario Court of Appeal released its decision finally ending the odyssey of the Bandito massacre. 5 of the 6 men who were convicted in the case.
April 8, 2006. A farmer outside the tiny village of Shedden, Ontario, made a grisly discovery: 4 vehicles abandoned in a field, with the bodies of 8 men stuffed inside. All were connected to the Bandidos Motorcycle Club. All had been shot execution style. Some had been tortured. None had seen it coming. The Shedden Massacre, also known as the Bandido Massacre, would go down as the worst mass murder in modern Canadian history. What makes this massacre particularly chilling isn't just the body count, it's who pulled the trigger. This wasn't rival clubs going to war. This was bandidos killing bandidos, a group of established members systematically wiping out an entire probationary chapter in a single night of calculated butchery. The victims, who became known as the Shedden 8, were lured to their deaths by men wearing the same patch, men who had called them brothers. The roots of this bloodbath lay in the complicated structure of the Bandidos in Canada. The club's international leadership in Texas had granted a charter to a Toronto chapter referred to as the No Surrender Crew. Many had patched over from a Canadian club called the Loners, but from the beginning the chapter was problematic. They weren't generating enough money, weren't recruiting quality members, and were generally seen as an embarrassment to the Bandidos brand. By early 2006, the US and European Bandidos leadership had had enough. They reportedly ordered Wayne Weiner Kellerstein, a senior member in good standing with the international organization, to pull the patches, strip the Toronto members of their Bandidos membership, but leave them alive. Kellerstein had other ideas. On the night of April 7th, he invited the Toronto chapter to a mandatory meeting at his farm outside Shedden. The men arrived expecting club business as usual. Once inside, they were ambushed by Kellerstein and his loyalists, bound with electrical tape and held captive for hours. One by one, they were led to a barn where they were shot and their bodies loaded into vehicles. The victims, Luis Manny Chopper Raposo, John Boxer Musiedere, Jamie Goldberg Flans, Paul Big Paulie Sinopoli, George 50 Jessam, Frank Bama Salerno, Michael Little Mikey Trotter, and George Crash Kriarakis ranged from full-patch bandidos to prospects. Some had been with the club for years, others were relative newcomers. None survived the night. The killer's plan fell apart almost immediately. Instead of disposing of the bodies in a way they wouldn't be found, they simply drove the vehicles containing the corpses to a rural location and abandoned them. A local farmer spotted the suspicious vehicles the next morning and called police. Within days, forensic evidence led investigators back to Kellerstein's farm, where they found blood in the barn and other evidence of the killings. What makes the Shedden Massacre particularly disturbing is the cold, premeditated nature of the crime. These weren't quick killings in the heat of battle. The victims were held for hours, knowing their former brothers were going to kill them. Some begged for their lives, some tried to bargain, one was even forced to clean the barn floor of his friend's blood before being executed himself. The level of betrayal and calculation exceeds even the notorious Lennoxville massacre.
And we're here again to show you another exhibit from the Bandidos trial. This time we're going to show you a videotape taken at Wayne Kellerstein's farm during the week before 8 Toronto area Bandidos were shot to death.
We have a small problem here. What's the right look there? Oh my fucking good God, it looks like I just climbed out of a fucking hillbilly fucking convention.
That's Wayne Kellerstein, and here we are in his house, and the people you're about to see, 5 of them are the accused in the Bandidos trial. Only Frank Mather is not pictured in this video. Kellerstein is heard saying that he's sleeping somewhere in the house. This is Dwight Mushy, and in the ball cap is Michael Sandom.
Yeah.
And this is Marcelo Aravina.
Yeah, you're beautiful. You're beautiful. Lazy little bastard, but you're fucking beautiful.
And this is Brett Gardner.
Ah, Jesus Christ on a fucking crutch. What do you do, bro?
What do you say? The trials revealed a dysfunctional organization torn by internal politics and warped power dynamics. Kellerstein emerged as a particularly twisted figure, a man who maintained a bizarre mixture of Nazi memorabilia and Bandidos gear at his farm, who fancied himself a major player in the organization, despite being viewed with contempt by many bandidos internationally. Testimony described him dancing around his barn between executions, listening to music and drinking beer while his former brothers awaited their turns to die. The motive went beyond simply following orders to pull patches. Evidence suggested Kellerstein wanted to establish himself as the undisputed leader of all bandidos in Canada. By eliminating the Toronto chapter, he could rebuild the organization under his complete control. There were also rumors that the Hells Angels, the dominant club in Ontario, had pressured Kellerstein to eliminate the Toronto Bandidos to prevent a major club war in the province. The legal aftermath saw 6 men convicted of multiple counts of first-degree murder. Kellerstein, Frank Mather, Brett Gardner, Michael Sandom, a former police officer who had infiltrated the club before going native, Dwight Mushi, and Marcelo Aravina, all received life sentences. The Bandidos organization quickly distanced itself from the killings, claiming Kellerstein had acted without authorization. For the small community of Shedden, population 300, the massacre brought unwanted international attention and permanently altered the town's identity. Local residents, many of whom had never even seen a bandido before the killings, suddenly found their village's name synonymous with one of Canada's worst mass murders. The Shedden Massacre effectively ended the bandidos' presence in Canada. The organization, which had been trying to establish a foothold to challenge the Hells Angels' dominance, withdrew from the country entirely. The incident also caused soul-searching within outlaw biker culture itself. If members couldn't trust their own brothers not to execute them, what was left of the supposed code of honor that these clubs claimed to live by? While the Shedden Massacre showed the deadly reality of internal club politics, the final entry on our list would become the largest and most chaotic biker shootout in American history, turning a family restaurant into a war zone in broad daylight. Number 1. Waco Biker Shooting, 2015. May 17, 2015. A sunny Sunday afternoon at the Twin Peaks restaurant in Waco, Texas. Families were eating lunch. Waitresses in skimpy mountain ranger outfits were serving cold beer. By 12:24 p.m., 9 bikers would be dead, 18 more wounded, and nearly 200 arrested in what would become the deadliest and most controversial motorcycle club conflict in American history. The Waco Biker Shootout wasn't just another case of rival gangs killing each other in some back alley. This was a full-scale firefight in a crowded restaurant beside a busy shopping center in broad daylight, with dozens of civilians caught in the crossfire. It was also a legal disaster that raised serious questions about police tactics, mass arrests, and constitutional rights. Years later, the truth about what really happened at Twin Peaks remains hotly disputed. The setup for disaster began when the Texas Confederation of Clubs and Independents, a motorcycle rights organization, scheduled a regular regional and legislative agendas were typically peaceful affairs attended by various clubs. The Bandidos, as the dominant club in Texas, often had a leadership presence. The problem started when members of the Cossacks MC, a rival club not invited to the meeting, showed up in force and took over the patio area. The Cossacks and Bandidos had been feuding for months over territory and the right to wear Texas bottom rockers on their vests. Several smaller skirmishes had already occurred across the state, raising tensions to the breaking point. Police later claimed they had warned Twin Peaks management about the potential for violence if the meeting went forward. Despite these warnings, the restaurant allowed the gathering to proceed. Meanwhile, law enforcement had positioned nearly 24 officers around the restaurant, including SWAT team members, anticipating trouble. When Bandidos members arrived and found Cossacks controlling the patio, an argument erupted. According to some witnesses, it started over a parking space. Others claimed it began when a Cossack was shoved or had his foot run over. Whatever the spark, the conflict escalated with shocking speed. Someone threw a punch, someone drew a weapon. Within seconds, guns were drawn and the shooting started. The scene descended into total chaos. Bikers fired at each other across the restaurant. Some fled inside for cover, terrifying civilian diners. Others drew knives and began stabbing opponents. Police officers stationed outside opened fire as well, though their exact role in the casualties remains disputed. The entire gunfight lasted just 90 seconds, but the aftermath would stretch on for years.
Cam video, a biker who the Cossacks identified as their own member, Richard Bear Kirshner, can be seen striking others with a chain. A separate police camera shows Kirshner was struck multiple times by the same ammo forensics reports say was used by police. He also had bullet wounds from a .38.
Video plus audio, 2.39 to 2.55. When the shooting stopped, the scene was apocalyptic. Bodies lay scattered across the parking lot and restaurant. The wounded screamed for help. Blood pooled on the pavement. Police moved in, detaining everyone with a motorcycle club connection, even those who had hidden inside to escape the violence. In the end, 9 bikers were dead. 6 Cossacks, 1 bandido, 1 scimitar, aligned with the Cossacks, and 1 unaffiliated biker. What followed was one of the most controversial mass arrests in American history. Police rounded up 177 bikers, including many who claimed they had no involvement in the shooting. All were charged with engaging in organized criminal activity. All had bail set at $1 million, and all faced potential life sentences. The mass arrest would later be criticized as a flagrant violation of civil rights, with many detainees held for weeks or months, despite little evidence connecting them personally to any violence. The investigation itself raised serious questions. Police recovered over 150 firearms, plus knives, batons, brass knuckles, and even chains with padlocks. But determining who shot whom proved nearly impossible. Forensic testing was inconsistent. Chain of custody for weapons was questionable. Perhaps most controversially, evidence later emerged suggesting that some of the fatal shots may have come from police rifles, not just biker weapons.
Police interviews with the nearly 200 people arrested that day reveal simmering tensions between the two clubs over power, authority, and what Cossacks members say is a financial shakedown by the rival Bandidos, involving the so-called Confederation of Clubs, or C.
The legal aftermath was a complete disaster for the prosecution. After a grand jury initially indicted 154 bikers, the cases began falling apart. The district attorney who pushed for the mass arrests, Abel Rayner, was voted out of office. His replacement dismissed all remaining cases in 2019. Only 1 biker ever went to trial, Jake Carrizal, a Bandidos chapter president, and even his case ended in a mistrial. After 4 years of legal proceedings, costing taxpayers millions, not a single conviction resulted from the deadliest biker shootout in American history. For the motorcycle club world, Waco represented a turning point. Many clubs became more security conscious, changing how they organized meetings and being more careful about potential confrontations in public spaces. The incident also accelerated the trend of clubs seeking legal representation proactively, rather than reactively after arrests. Public perception of outlaw clubs hardened further, with the image of bodies in the Twin Peaks parking lot replacing the romanticized notion of free-spirited rebels on motorcycles. Media coverage focused on the criminal elements of club culture rather than brotherhood or riding, cementing the association between motorcycle clubs and organized violence in the public mind.